at the center. This is the first of the 2 lectures. The other lecture will be toward the end of the spring semester, I believe. But Dr. Lloyd Lee will be introducing the visiting scholar for this afternoon. So we'll get to that in just a minute, but wanted to introduce Dr. Lee to the rest of you who may not know that he is now the newly appointed director of the Center for Regional Studies. You may know of his other affiliations, but starting now in the fall semester, he was appointed director of the Center for Regional Studies. Now, he already had a lot of other titles. So Dr. Lee, this is going to be a long paragraph, but I'll go through it. He is Associate Professor and Graduate Director of the Native American Studies Department here at the University of New Mexico. He sits on the Executive Board for the Institute for American Indian Research at UNM, and also the Internal Advisory Board for Advanced at UNM and the UNM Diversity Council, coordinated by the Division for Equity and Inclusion. He's also a faculty member of the Institute for American Indian Education and the Native American Faculty Council at UNM. And besides that, he's also on the Council for the American Indian Studies Association. And locally here in the city of Albuquerque, he is on the Albuquerque's Commission on American Indian and Alaska Native Affairs. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Lloyd Lee as the new director of the Center for Regional Studies. Okay. We also have from the CRS office, Alicia Fitzgerald. She is the program specialist at the CRS now. She's been with CRS for, this is your 4th year, I believe. Alicia, you want to say hello?
Yes, hello. I've been here with CRS for almost 4 years now.
4 years, yeah, okay. All righty, well, with that, just a few basic announcements, just to let everybody know that Alicia is recording the session, so we have it preserved. We usually do this for all the CRS lectures, you know. We like to have them preserved and available. And you probably also know that in the Zoom, you know, kind of room here, if you could, once the speaker, you know, begins the lecture, if you could turn off your microphones so that, you know, we don't get background noise or anything like that. So with that, let me turn it over to the CRS director, Dr. Lloyd Lee.
Thank you, Dr. Rivera. Welcome, everyone. I'm glad to see we have a large crowd for Dr. Herrera's presentation. I just want to welcome you and thank you for spending some time with us and listening to Dr. Herrera. Just to kind of give you a little overview of the Center for Regional Studies and our mission. The center was created back almost 30 years ago, 31 years ago, through an appropriation from the New Mexico State Legislature. And so it's been here at UNM for that period of time. And the mission of the center is to really build the knowledge of the US Southwest region, particularly here in New Mexico, and our understanding of the borderlands. And it's a multidisciplinary unit that we've done. We have quite a few initiatives. Some of the ones that we really drive are our graduate student fellowships, faculty research, digital media, public service projects that really promote and focus on activities that are tied to New Mexico and the Southwest. And so, you know, we really try to tie in that particular mission with what the goals of teaching and research and public services here at the University of New Mexico. So I just wanted to mention that for those that may not know about our mission. You can also go to our website at crs.unm.edu to get more information and to kind of look at a lot of the initiatives that have been created and some of the products that have come from that. And so it's a very rich and important part of not only just New Mexico, but across the Southwest and the borderlands. So I just want to mention that to you. Okay, let me go ahead and introduce you to Dr. Spencer Herrera. He is an associate professor of Spanish at New Mexico State University, where he teaches Chicano Studies. He is the co-editor of Quinceañera Reflections on the New Mexico Homeland and co-author of Sagrado, a Photopoetics across the Chicano Homeland. He was born and raised in Houston, Texas, but has enjoyed living in Nuevo México for 20 years. He completed his Ph.D. in Spanish with a minor in film at the University of New Mexico. So please, let's welcome Dr. Spencer Herrera.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us on today's Zoom talk. I see some friendly faces. It's different through Zoom, but I still see friendly faces, and I see Melina Vizquino Aleman waving. I see Rodrigo Figueroa, a colleague of mine here at NMSU. I see a young, upcoming rising star, Jorge Hernandez, there in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese, now at UNM. Hope that you guys reach out to him there on UNM campus. He's new to campus. I see my wonderful colleague, Dr. Manal Hamza, here at NMSU. If you ever want to do feminist studies or anything dealing with voices of underrepresentation, please reach out to Dr. Hamza. She's an amazing scholar. I see some other colleagues at NMSU, my department at Glenn Fetzer, good friend of mine at UNM, Levi Romero, the New Mexico Poet Laureate, and Dr. Melendez as well. And appreciate all of you joining us today. I am going to start off, I have a PowerPoint, if you don't mind, but it's slide driven. So hopefully it's the right one. And let me just share it real quick. Let me go to the, me and Alicia practiced this yesterday, and it was not smoother yesterday, but that's okay. I think it'll work. How's it looking so far? Thumbs up? Let me make sure I have the right one. Yeah, it's looking good. Okay. Great. So today's talk is A Pura Pala en la Pandemia, on the road from El Llano to Big Bend and beyond. So it's kind of an eclectic conversation we're going to have with the work I did this semester as a visiting scholar for the Center for Regional Studies. But I think that, like many of us here, although we have many interests, I think there's oftentimes a common thread in what we do. And so I'm hoping you'll see a common thread in some of my work as a Chicano literature professor, but also as a Spanish professor, and how I combine those two worlds. I don't know if it's raining in Albuquerque, but the good news is we're getting sprinkles down here in Las Cruces, so I've always considered that a blessing when it's raining. So I want to start off because I don't want to forget anybody at the end. And really, a lot of our work is only doable because of the people that support us and the institutions that support us. So I want to start off just thanking people. The UNM Center for Regional Studies, not just for supporting me during this visiting scholar position, but when I was a graduate student at UNM doing my doctoral studies, and Jorge, I hope you're listening, I applied for a graduate fellowship and I was awarded one, thankfully, and that really put me through graduate school. I was much younger. My wife and I were, we had one small child and another on the way, so it really allowed me to focus on my studies. So I'm really indebted to UNM and the Center for Regional Studies. Dr. Gabriel Melendez, who during the summertime when I was applying for this position, was letting me know that, hey, we're still trying to make this happen. But due to the pandemic, we didn't quite know what was going to happen with obviously the pandemic itself, but also with the finances of UNM and the state and the state legislature. So I really appreciate him just seeing me through that process. And then Dr. Lee, the process was seamless. You stepped right in and took over the reins, and I really appreciate your support. And also Dr. Rivera, although I've been to campus many times, I did my PhD there. There are many buildings and processes I'm not familiar with. And Dr. Rivera showed up with mask, not in hand, but on face, and just guided me around and make sure that I was able to make a smooth transition to campus. And I really appreciate that. And of course, Alicia Fitzgerald, from day one all the way through today, and I'm sure maybe even afterwards, has just been a wonderful support and contact person for me. Tomas Yin, the Director of Special Collections at the Center for Southwest Research at UNM Libraries. It's very challenging to do archival work during, in general, but during a pandemic because the library was closed and open and closed, but really working with my schedule to make sure I could get in and have access to the resources there. And also here at home in Las Cruces, I'm very thankful for NMSU and the College of Arts and Sciences. This past semester, the fall, I was able to do a lot of work because they awarded me a sabbatical research leave. So I'm very appreciative of that time. And also my department head, Dr. Glenn Fetzer, here in the Department of Languages and Linguistics at NMSU, and he's also a professor of French, has been very supportive of me professionally and personally since he's arrived on campus several years ago. So thank you all for your help and support. And just to reiterate, how much we appreciate the CRS. They were helpful and supportive in getting our co-edited book, Querencia, Reflections on the New Mexico Homeland, out to press. I'm very thankful to my co-authors, my co-editors, Dr. Vanessa Fonseca Chavez at ASU Polytechnic, and Levi Romero, hopefully soon an associate professor in the Department of Chicano and Chicano Studies, and also the New Mexico Poet Laureate. The CRS has been supportive of many projects over the years, and this is one of them. So our book is a product of that support. And if you're interested in learning more about Querencia, one's love of place and people and history and culture, then please check it out at UNM Press. So working during a pandemic, like all of us, I'm no exception, but when you're having to do a lot of work because you have a sabbatical leave and a research fellowship, I kind of equated it to NFL offense and defense. So if you ever watch the NFL, they might say, they got to take what the defense gives you. So yeah, I'd like to do a long pass and make it to the end zone, but that wasn't always available to me. So it's a lot of dinking and dunking, a lot of 3-yard gains, 4-yard gains. And you just hope to move the chains and get a first down and just keep moving forward. So that's kind of what I did, a lot of dinking and dunking, putting things together until I was able to make that into something bigger and better. Everybody hear me so far, and everything looking good as far as the presentation? Okay, thank you. So one of the things I did, an overall theme of my work for the sabbatical leave was to do some research on the Rio Grande. There's been a fair amount of work done on the Rio Grande. I'm not a geographer or a biologist or even a social scientist. I'm a literature professor and a Spanish professor. So really, for me, it's about stories. I like to consider myself a storyteller. I've been blessed to have really good storytellers in my life and my family, and also have some wonderful storytellers mentor me. And so when I decided to work in the Rio Grande, I really wanted it to look like Sagrado, the book that I co-authored with Levi Romero and Robert Kaiser. And really it's about stories and people and places. And so that's what I wanted to do. And that's still what I plan to do, is go along the Rio Grande from Creede, Colorado, all the way to the mouth down near Brownsville, Texas, and find those stories, find those people, and learn about them. And so one of the things I was able to do is when you can't meet with people, you still can hear their stories. And that's due to the hard work of like Patricia de Andrea, who was a wonderful collection of papers at the Center for Southwest Research on the Rio Grande, on the Rio Bravo. She spent about 12 years researching the Rio Grande, and it's impressive. It really is impressive, the amount of work she did going up and down the river, canoeing the river, walking the river, meeting with people, interviewing people, mapping the river. She did a lot of work, and those are just some of the boxes I was looking at and accessing to understand the work that she did, and what I would like to do with some of her work, and then how I would incorporate it into a future book project. She did a lot of interviews as well. Here's just one box, and you can see how impressive that is. There's another box, and those are all oral interviews, and they're recorded and transcribed. All kinds of people from all kinds of communities and walks of life and generations. So once again, her files there in the library at UNM are just really impressive and deserve to be studied. And I hope that something comes of it, because she put the work in for sure. So here is just one transcription. And that of all the transcriptions, and I didn't get a chance to look at every single one of them, but I am looking for certain things, like anyone else who does archival work. We kind of know what we're looking for. And one of the things that interests me as a Spanish professor is language. And what is language and how it influences us and how it forges our identity, multiple identities. And one of the things that have always interested me based on my own family's history, and also growing up as a heritage speaker of Spanish, is the impact that the language can have on you when you have it as part of your language, or when you're denied it as part of your cultural heritage. And we've seen that time and time again through multiple studies, but it was interesting to see it in the archives from, in this particular case, a mother and daughter from Garfield, New Mexico, which is just right near Hatch, and how they witnessed and experienced firsthand the discrimination for being Mexicanos and for speaking Spanish. And so what often happens is it's not that the kids don't want to learn Spanish, it's that the parents withhold it from them because they know of the pain it can bring when Spanish is your first language, or you have an accent in Spanish, or you don't speak English well enough. And so the mother in this case decided not to teach her children Spanish. So they were monolingual English speakers for the most part. They understood some because they grew up around it. But the pain that it causes, and it'd be one of my goals is to look at that thread, if you will, of language and identity along the Rio Grande, which exists all across the Southwest. It's not unique to this region, but it's something that continues today. And I can tell you that as a Spanish professor, it hasn't stopped. And so I'm interested to see the differences in generations and how we can, hopefully turn the tide on that. I think we have somewhat, but of course, racism and discrimination often rear their ugly head from one generation to the next. And so, as I mentioned, a lot of my project had to do with the Rio Grande, and I'll get into another part of what I did during this semester. But I followed the Rio Grande, but not just along the river, but I would say the greater Rio Grande Valley or region, communities that are connected to the Rio Grande because they need water for farming and other industries. And one of the histories that is extremely important, but unfortunately has been undertold, is the Porvenir massacre. Now, if you're looking at this map here on the right, we can see El Paso, and Las Cruces is just north of there. Here's Marfa, Texas. So Marfa, if you ever Google it, it's very well known because a lot of artists go there. It's kind of an artist enclave. And it's a neat little town, kind of small, but it's neat. And also Alpine's a nice little town. Well, Porvenir would be directly west of that, pretty much along the Rio Grande on the US side. But this Texas historical marker is along the state highway, so people can see it. And it's only been up for about 2 or 3 years. And it came to existence because of the hard work and perseverance of a lot of people, including the descendants of this massacre, scholars who have worked to uncover and recover and make public a lot of the Mexican and Mexican-American Chicano history, indigenous history of Texas. And it finally came to exist, if you will, and placed there. So what is the Puerto Venir massacre? So you could read that on your left, but basically in 1918, so this is a long time ago. And you might think, well, that's over 100 years ago. Why is that important? But I think you'll be able to see the importance in a bit. It was a band of Texas Rangers, which are basically, they were official policemen of the state. And they were trying to settle a score, if you will, for some cattle rustlers. And so they went to the small town of Puerto Venir, and about 140 people. And so to sort of pay retribution, they gathered 15 men and boys, took them from their homes, right, early morning, took them to a bluff and shot them all, right? And that was the lesson that they had to pay for someone else's crime. Now, the story went that the Rangers said that they were provoked and they were ambushed. So who's going to, basically say anything against the Texas Rangers? I mean, they just saw what they did. So that was the official story for many years, until people and descendants started saying, well, let's talk about the story. Let's revisit it. Let's uncover bits and pieces and challenge the official story. And so interestingly enough, there was an archaeological dig in 2002 that proved that all the bullets that were shot were government issued. In other words, these men and boys were pulled from their homes in their sleep. They had no protection. And these Texas Rangers, who were supposed to serve and protect, killed innocent boys and men. And I say boys because the youngest was 15. He was visiting his grandfather. And on the right, you can see the names. And I really appreciate that someone had listed the names and who they were and who their family was, right? So you've got men, Mexicanos, all of them are Mexican-American, ranging from age 15 to in their late 40s. So it was a massacre. And I mentioned, well, it's 100 years ago. Why should we care now? Well, history in some ways hasn't changed a whole lot. We still have a lot of issues, and we've seen those issues recently in the news. That's the first thing. Second thing is that a lot of our history has really been unchallenged, and we just think, well, that's the way it was. We have no way of knowing any better. But if we talk to people, look at archives, get firsthand stories of these people who were obviously descendants, so it's not firsthand, but they're guarding these stories of their grandparents. And then we have archaeologists, scientists coming in and say, yeah, that is what happened, what the descendants said, based on the scientific evidence. And then we can uncover those stories and teach them in our public schools. We need these stories in our K through 12 curriculum because they have been hidden from us. And there's more stories than that. If you were to type in Google Texas Rangers, you're going to see some pretty gruesome images of a lot of lynchings, particularly of Mexicans and Mexican Americans in Texas, that were carried out by the Texas Rangers. So in Marfa, which is entering Big Bend country, which is where I spent a decent amount of time during my research to understand the communities, visit some places that I could. And one place that I had visited more than once, not just during my research, but before that, was called the Blackwell School. It's a traditional one-room school in Marfa, Texas. And this is a very interesting and unfortunately traumatic event. If you want to know more about it, you can look for the documentary called The Children of Giant. Many of you are familiar with the film Giant, starring Rock Hudson and Elizabeth Taylor and James Dean. Well, great movie, fascinating movie. That much of it was filmed in the Marfa and Alpine area, in the Big Bend area, if you will. And the documentary basically shows the story of the Mexicanos that lived in those towns during that period, particularly the children who were hanging around the set, and then later revisits those children as adults, and they're 70 years old during the documentary. And one of the things that came from that was how terrible and traumatic the school system was, because they were Mexican and because they were Spanish speakers. And so what this school did, and what this teacher did, Miss Evelyn Davis, instead of just hitting them, because that's what happened to a lot of kids, they got, spankings or hit on the hand with rulers or wash your mouth out with soap, they decided to have a funeral. And you can see in this picture at the Blackwell, there's the coffin, there's the cross, there's this plaque, if you will, commemorating the event. And it was called Burying Mr. Spanish. So in the documentary, they show this. And then also in this image, you get a sense of it. The kids were made to put Spanish words in the coffin. And then they took the coffin to the front of the school where the flagpole is, and they buried Mr. Spanish. So the message was clearly, your language is dead. You're no longer allowed to speak it. So for those of you who study Chicano literature, Lorenzo Aldúa wrote, language and culture are twin skin, right? It's part of, language is part of everyone's identity. Bilingualism is a part of many of our identities, and for some, trilingualism. And many of these kids, this was their mother tongue. This was the language they spoke at home. So we can imagine how traumatic that is. That happened in 1954, but still today, not that traumatic, but things do happen, and I've witnessed some personally, and also have experienced some, and my students have in the classroom, of different experiences they shared with me. So that was in Marfa, Texas. This is also in Marfa, Texas, driving through, I get out and try to check out what I can. And I went to the cemetery, and it's fascinating to see that the cemetery is still segregated. Now, I don't know what happens in a funeral. I actually did see a funeral, but I didn't want to join it. If someone, they still bury people on one side and on the other, but this is a fence, and on the fence is barbed wire. So I don't know who would want to climb a fence in a cemetery, number one, and who would want to cross a fence with barbed wire, and what are they keeping them from, right? From visiting a relative on the other side? Because we know that there are people who, as we say, mitad, mitad, right? There are people who, in northern New Mexico, coyotes, who are half white and half Hispanic, or half Mexican in this case. So what happens in those scenarios? I don't know. And I'd like to go back, and I plan to go back and get some personal stories and meet with people and interview them. But just knowing that segregation exists beyond death is mind-blowing. And I'm not sure, I know why they did it back in the day. I just don't know why they haven't dismantled it. So that's also in Marfa, Texas. And I've been there. I don't feel any weird discrimination towards me when I'm there. It's just the way these towns were created back in the day, and they're remnants. They still exist. So as I make my way into Big Bend, a lot of Big Bend, and I camp there overnight by myself. And if they tell you you don't need a 4x4, you need a 4x4. It's very challenging to get into some of these camp spots without a 4x4. But a lot of Big Bend just looks like southern New Mexico to me. But other parts are absolutely gorgeous because the river is different. The river is different in every spot. But here we have a canyon, Santa Elena Canyon, and the views are breathtaking. The water is about mid-chest high. I got into the river in various parts, but I didn't get in there. But a young man that was hiking near me got in, and he crossed it, and he got in about mid-chest high and touched the other canyon wall. And I told him, I said, well, you're in Mexico now, and he didn't know that. But I think a lot of people don't understand how close these communities are and how close we are to Mexico. And that was a fact of life for many communities back in the day. They may have lived on one side, but families lived on both sides. Communities and businesses and schools existed on both sides. And it still does, not necessarily along the river, although it does, but in other places along the border. If you ever go to Palomas in Columbus, New Mexico, There's a lot of kids who go to high school in Columbus and even Deming, but they live in Palomas and they cross the border every day to go to school. So the juxtaposition of borders is fascinating. And thank God the border wall has been put to hopefully a permanent pause or permanent ending, because there are just parts of this border that are just too beautiful. And I would say they're all beautiful, but many parts are just world-class sites of natural beauty. To put a wall up, it would destroy not only the aesthetics, but nature itself. So here's another part of Big Bend, and like I said, the scenery is breathtaking, and I can't wait to go back to also collect some stories. I was able to talk to some folks, park rangers and locals who were fishing, but you know, it's challenging when everybody has the masks on and you want to be able to sit down and have a conversation. But for me, a lot of these things are, I like to visit once and then go back, and hopefully with a collaborator or two, so I have an idea of what we're looking for, and then we go back and then we find it. So I did a fair amount of field research in Big Bend, excuse me, but I also wanted to go to South Texas because I had never been to where the Rio Grande flushes out, if you will, to the Gulf of Mexico. I'd been close. This beach, Boca Chica Beach, is actually close to Brownsville. If you're familiar with South Padre Island, it's about 45 minutes away, just because the roads are kind of curvy and you have to take your time. Port Isabel area. You can drive on the beach. That's one great thing about Texas beaches. Growing up in Texas, you can drive your car on the beach. It's not like California. But you can only drive so far because you will get stuck. And I did get stuck, but I got out. But I wanted to go to where the Rio Grande opens up, and that was not close to the beach entrance here. So I had a nice hike. It's about an hour or so hike to get to that part. And not many people go there because you're very far from that entrance, and it's very isolated. But this is the mouth of the Rio Grande. You can see this is the Gulf of Mexico and the waves are crashing in, but this is also the Rio Grande pushing its waters out. The other side here, that tower and these few people over there, that's Mexico. People fishing, and then there's a few guys fishing on this side. But it was fascinating to see because I had never seen that part. I've been to Creed where the headwaters are and they sort of trickle out of the mountain. And now I can say I've been to the mouth of the Rio Grande and many parts in between. And so for me, I'll talk about this in a bit, but as a writer, I hate to put people into two categories, but if I could generalize, when it comes to, let's say, creative writing, there's two kinds of writers. There's the writers who have this wonderful, vibrant imagination, and they don't have to go to that place. They can imagine it. They can read about it. Maybe talk to some people who've been there, but it exists in their imagination. And I think that's a wonderful tool. And then there are people like me who, I certainly can imagine some things, but I have to be there. I've got to visit it. I've got to meet with people. I've got to hear their stories. I've got to walk the land there. And then I get a sense of what it's like, and then I can write about it. So a lot of this was going and being there, as my friend, the photographer, Robert Kaiser, used to say, you got to be there. And I took that advice to heart. So one of the things that interests me was the juxtaposition of some of the new creations, if you will, in South Texas. South Texas, although it has South Padre Island and people recognize that name, really a lot of it is underdeveloped. They share a lot of in common with the communities in southern New Mexico, with the colonias, where they lack a key resource, be it electricity or running water or Wi-Fi or what have you. And that particular stretch kind of between Port Isabel and Brownsville is very similar. But unfortunately, at least I think so, it's going to change a lot. Others might disagree, and I understand why. But I like how those beaches in South Texas are very pristine, if you will, except for South Padre. There's a lot of hotels there, obviously. But other places, there's nothing there. But that's changed. because Elon Musk recently relocated or created his SpaceX and established it there at that section near Boca Chica Beach. And the juxtaposition is fascinating to me, where we have this old Civil War trail where there was a battle there. And that day they were actually going to test that rocket. Now the rockets that go to the space station are launched from what I understand, Cape Canaveral in Florida. But there he has a whole enterprise where they test everything. And what a reporter told me when I was speaking to him is that he wants to move all his SpaceX people there. He always is going to move Tesla to Austin, but the pushback from SpaceX moving there is the people in California saying, well, you know, there's no infrastructure. Where are we going to put our kids in school? And he said, I'll build you a school. And he's now the richest man in the world, so he can. But it'll be interesting to see, you know, the schools they get versus the schools that the rest of the kids get in the colonias and the surrounding communities. Because really they're dependent upon the tourism industry and the fishing industry. So I think there's still going to be, you know, it's not going to be Marfa, but there'll still be two separate communities, if you will, the haves and the have-nots. But like I said, some people are welcoming because they see that it's going to bring jobs, and I understand that. So I'd like to transition to the second big chunk of my work here. I was really fortunate to have this position and to have the time to do this. But unfortunately, it was the sad news of the passing of the literary great, the godfather of Chicano literature, Rudolfo Anaya, that basically inspired me, if you will. His work inspired me to, and many others. I know Dr. Vizcaino Aleman also did some wonderful work to basically honor his legacy and not just his literary production, but the work that he did for many communities in New Mexico and his mentorship. And so what's an interesting sort of connection here, if you will, is that several years ago, probably more than 5, I wrote Atzlan, the journal here of Chicano Studies, because I wanted to create a dossier, which is basically a thematic special collection to do for every issue. And I wrote them saying, I'd like to do a dossier on New Mexico. They had just published one on the theme of 1972. So I figured if they would do one on time, you know, maybe they would do one on place. And so I wrote them, put together, you know, basically a proposal, and it didn't interest them at the time. And they said, well, you know, no thanks, basically. The good thing about that is, you know, I like to think when one door closes, another one opens. And from that conversation I had with several colleagues, we created Querencia. And so from a dossier, we went from that to creating a book. And so I think that something great came of that. And in the book, Rodolfo Anaya wrote the foreword, and it was his last published work in his lifetime. So we're very honored to have Rodolfo Anaya write the foreword to our book. After hearing the news of his passing, I wrote Atzlan because since then I had done some work for them. And I said, I'm sure you've heard of the passing of Rodolfo Anaya. I hope you agree that it would be fitting to curate a dossier on his legacy, his literary legacy, as well as what he's done for many scholars and writers. And they agreed, thankfully. And so we put together a great group of scholars. I don't have their names up here because we just got through with the proofs, and I want to hold off until it's out in print. But they might recognize their titles, and I just want to share some of the titles here. That pura pala, that's not my expression. I borrowed that from Rodolfo Anaya, who uses that expression in the foreword to Querencia to talk about the idea of hard work. It just means pure shovel, right? When you dig an acequia or you build a house, back in the day particularly, you did it a pura pala. You know, there was no machinery. You just had to grab the shovel and get to work. And so he mentions that when he asked his grandfather grandfather, abuelito, how did you dig this acequia? How did you make this casa de adobe? And he would say, mijito or hijito, a pura pala. And so when students would ask Rodolfo Anaya, how did you write all those books? 40 plus books, all genres, right? Narrative, essay, theater, children's books. His response was, a pura pala. And so I'm borrowing that expression from him just as an extra way to pay homage to the hard work that he put in all those years. And I mentioned 1972 because that's the year that Bless Mi Ultima came out, along with a lot of other great literary production and groundbreaking work for Chicanos in general. Then we get Rodolfo Anaya, El Duende Loco and the Healing Powers of Cultura. Growing Up, Chicana in the Heart of Anaya's Atzlan. These are wonderful essays. Ceremony of Sisterhood, Performing Mestizide and Rodolfo Anaya's Literature and Plays for Children. The Ghetto Curator and the Curandera. So we also have some art pieces in there that are just wonderful. Man Was Not Made to Know So Much, Rodolfo Anaya and the Nuclear Age. Great essay. We have a lot of great essays. Some are more on the personal side, some are more academic. Fate is Blind, Disability, Aesthetics, and Rodolfo Anaya's Tortuga. So diverse stories and diverse narratives, if you will. Rodolfo Anaya's Chupacabra series and context, inspiring activism in Querencia. He wrote about everything, including Chupacabra and Billy the Kid, and he did a really good job. Landing Up in Las Cruces, Rodolfo Anaya, Alrededor del Bloque. So he not only influenced northern New Mexico, but also southern New Mexico. And last, Rodolfo Anaya's Portrait Commission for the National Portrait Gallery at the Smithsonian Institution. So wonderful group of essays. I look forward to sharing when they come out on Atzlan so people can read them and enjoy them and remember and celebrate his legacy. Here is the portrait, which I believe also I saw in the journal there in the English department from UNM. I know Dr. Vizcaíno Aleman edited that, and it's a beautiful also tribute to his work. What's really great about this portrait and what's really unique about it, other than its stunning beauty and simplicity, is that it is the only portrait at the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery of a Latino, in this case Chicano, that was commissioned for a Latino artist, Gaspar Enriquez. So it's unique. It's the only one like that. And I just think it's beautiful. So a pura pala, and when I was reading about Anaya, because when I was going to write my essay, although I've written about Anaya before, as I mentioned, I'm the type of writer who likes to be there. And so as I'm sitting there thinking, okay, great, I'm going to curate this dossier. And I've got some great people lined up, great articles. Now, what am I going to write? Because, I want it to be different. And as I was looking for information and I'm studying and researching, I ran across this interview, and it states the interview that he did with Albuquerque Journal back in 2016. Rodolfo Anaya stated, "I am thoroughly New Mexican. I grew up there. I know the landscape, the people, the small communities. I said before that in order to understand me, you have to understand me in the context of New Mexico." So as I read that and I thought about it, that really made sense to me as a writer. And I said to myself, okay, Senor Anaya, I'll take your word for it. I'm going to go out and see New Mexico again. Like I've seen it many times, and I'm going to try to see it through a new lens. I'm going to try to see it through your lens. And that's what I set out to do. So I went out to Pastura, Nuevo México, where he was born. It's in the open llano. So if you ever bless mi ultima, and you think, well, what is the llano like? I highly recommend you go out to the llano and get a sense of these places. It really heightens your senses when you read the book, because you can just see forever. As far as your eyes can see, that's how far you'll be able to see. And to go to a small community like Pastura, where there's probably less than 10 houses standing, and there's no water that you can see, and you just realize how life is so hard, not just for the people, but for the animals and the plants. And you get a sense of how people had to depend on each other for survival. Husbands and wives, families, and communities. right? Levi and I have spoken about this topic many times, and he grew up in a small community. And, you know, if you don't have a tractor, well, you don't have a tractor. So, you know, hopefully your neighbor will lend you one. And so that was a beautiful experience. And I went twice just to get a sense in the cemetery and to see the names that are buried there. And I write about that in my essay, and it really opened my eyes up to that experience in West Ultima. And then I went to Puerto Luna, which is not terribly far. It's about probably 45 minutes drive to an hour, more or less. But it's to me, it was vastly different. Puerto Luna is like a Rockwellian portrait of New Mexico. It is green pastures, beautiful adobe homes, tin roofs, just really rich, fertile farmland. And this is Mother's Village. And I can just imagine the sense of abundance that he created in West Ultima, talking about Puerto Luna. Beautiful place. I recommend you drive through there if you never have. It's not far from Santa Rosa. I also went to Santa Rosa and the park lake there where people go swimming. I remember taking our daughter there when she was young, but I never noticed a statue, which is kind of set off from the park. Beautiful statue of Rodolfo Anaya writing. So, you know, I'll drive around Santa Rosa and get a sense of that community. And then I thought, well, okay, I'm gonna go back to Albuquerque and go to Barelas because that was his teenage home. And I'm thinking, I'm making progress, I'm seeing things and I'm learning about him. But sometimes you feel like you hit a dead end, although it's not really a dead end. So I looked for 433 Pacific Avenue. And I'm driving and I'm looking, I find Pacific and I'm driving down to find 433 and boom, there it is, an empty lot. And I write about it in my essay that it's this place, you know, just dirt, brick shards, and weeds, right? And I think, well, what does this mean? And there's some people moving in next door, the house to the left there. And they're looking at me because I'm just standing around looking at an empty lot. And then finally, I just tell them who I am. And I say, hey, I'm here. I'm looking at Rodolfo Anaya's teenage, his childhood home. And I thought, they might not even know who he is. But, surprisingly, it was I was wrong. The mom said, oh, I used to teach at Rodolfo Anaya Elementary. And they were moving into the neighborhood. And it just seemed to me like, their boxes, their load just seemed lighter, brisker, to know they're moving into the home next to where Rodolfo Anaya grew up in the Barelas neighborhood, where Melina also, I think, grew up. She didn't grow up there or near there, but she mentions that. And it was a nice connection to see that as well. And then I think, well, okay, the home doesn't exist, but we have his words, we have his stories, we have his papers at the Center for Southwest Research. And I went to the Center for Southwest Research and I'm reading his papers. And there I take out, in his own handwriting, his first full draft. And I just thought, well, this is neat. I get to hold Rodolfo Anaya's first full draft of Bless Me Ultima and see his process of writing and editing. And like I said, he's got over 40 books, all kinds of books, all kinds of genres for all kinds of readers. If you have children or nieces and nephews or grandchildren, I highly recommend you get his children's books. They are just excellent. And there's stories in there that are much better than the other stories because he uses the culture, he uses the language, he uses mito, to retell stories and to captivate a younger audience. And so he can create readers who are not only interested in reading, but also recreating myth, something that was very important to him. So although the house doesn't exist, the stories still exist. Gracias, thank you. And I hope that we can have a plática and talk about, some of the things, ideas I might have shared here and the work that Rodolfo Anaya and how he inspired us and anything else that may have came up during my talk. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Herrera. That's pretty amazing information. And I want to open it up for questions that people may have. And I think might be easier just to go ahead and direct your question to Dr. Herrera and have a conversation going. I know hopefully most of you be able to stay for that, but if you can't, that's okay.
Oh, Levi mentioned La Washa. So is that Washington Middle School? I think so. So once again, I mean, all these communities have stories. And not only you have to be there, but it really helps to talk to people in the know, because if not, you know, I'm an outsider. So thank you, Levi, for mentioning La Washa, and Melina also for mentioning La Washa, which that was what Washington Middle School was known as, I think, back in the day, and maybe still today. And I think, Alicia, were you gonna, I don't know if you're gonna unmute folks and they can just chime in, or if people want to go to the chat, I can try to look at that and other people can look at it too and let us know. But
Yeah, I guess if anyone has a question, you can just unmute yourself. And then there's also a feature under reactions at the bottom where you can raise your hand. But
or comment. It doesn't have to be.
yeah, or type in a comment,
Yeah.
comment or a question.
Spencer Santos y buenas tardes desde Dios. It's Levi. Hey, what an amazing, wonderful presentation. You said so many things that I was sort of just trying to jot down as you were taking us along on that very nice and beautiful, nurturing journey. No, pero one of the things that really stood out was what you said. Although the house doesn't exist, the stories exist. And that is so true, I think, for any one of us probably here today who does not live in the house in which they were raised. You know, the house is gone, but the memory of living in that house and the stories continue to follow us no matter where it is that we go. So gracias for that pensamiento and sharing that with us.
Thank you, Levi. Levi's been one of my collaborators and good friends and a mentor, I would say, as well. And you see that a lot in his stories of poetry, remembrance, and other places. But I think that's so true. I'm looking at Manal right now, and I hear her stories when she talks about Palestine and Jordan, and she can't go back right now. And she's thinking of her parents. But those stories still exist, and she's sharing those stories in different ways. I see Rodrigo Figueroa, who hasn't been able to go back to Mexico City, El DF, for I don't know how long either, for similar reasons. You know, yeah, Las Cruces, we speak Spanish here, but I can't think of two places that are more unalike than Las Cruces and Mexico City. I mean, Las Cruces is just a neighborhood in Mexico City. And not even a very lively one. So those stories are so important. And Levi, you know, you've shared so many with me as well over the years. And I think of your poem, Molino Abandonado, and how, you know, I think I wrote about that in some other place, and how the Molino, the mill was abandoned. And I pulled a Levi who looks at things in a different angle. And I said, no, the mill wasn't, the mill didn't abandon the people abandoned the mill, right? They abandoned, the place. And so it's really, you know, as Denise Chavez says, or use the term, cultural warriors, we're all cultural warriors here. And it's our job to fight those battles in the classroom, in our scholarship, sometimes in the communities, in the schools. And we do it because it's hard work and it means a lot to us to keep those stories alive. Just like that group who, I have to look up their name, who kept the story of Porvenir alive, right? They could have let that memory die, but they chose not to. So thank you, Levi, for that comment.
querido profesor, dear professor.
Yes.
It's great to see you again, once again. Thank you for your words. Thank you for sharing these stories with us. I truly believe that stories have an immense power. And I think both stories and storytelling, they offer us a couple of things. I think they offer us redemption. I think they offer us salvation. But most importantly, and as you've already highlighted thoroughly, I think they offer us survival. And survival is very, very important. And so, once again, thank you for your words and thank you for your stories. I'm sure that many of us will take these stories and are now have the task to share them along the way. Gracias. Thank you.
No, thank you. I'm not sure which way the dicho goes. If they say it's hard to find a good teacher, but maybe harder to find a good student. And Jorge was just a good student. When I first met him, I was like, ¿y este altote qué? This tall, light-skinned, blue-eyed Mexicano. But as soon as I had him in class, I knew he was going to go far. So now he's at UNL, doing the Ph.D. in Spanish there. And so hopefully you'll be giving these talks yourself soon enough, because like I said, it's hard to find good students, but when we find them, we try to hold on to them. So thank you, Jorge, for your good work. Thank you. Well, I don't know, that maybe there's not other questions or dialogue. It's already past 3, and I really appreciate everyone's time. You probably are just recovered from your Zoom marathon in the fall, and now you get to start a Zoom marathon this spring with my talk. So I'm very thankful. Muchas gracias por su tiempo y atención. And I hope you have a wonderful spring semester.
Thank you again, Dr. Herrera. It was a great presentation. Dr. Rivera, did you want to say anything real quick before everyone gets off?
You're muted, Dr. Rivera, you're muted.
Okay, here I am.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
thank you, Lloyd, for getting me back into the conversation here. Just want to appreciate, Spencer, everything that you talked about, and certainly your storytelling technique certainly reminds me a lot of what Enrique Lamadrid does and what Gabriel Melendez, and and then we cannot forget, of course, Esteban Arellano. He was really on this thing about memoria, el que pierde su tierra, pierde su memoria, and stuff. And so this, I'm sure that, now that you talk about Pastura, and gosh, I think all of us want to go there in Puerto de Luna. I've had graduate students that have done research there on the acequias, and it's just, an amazing place to be at and so forth. So thank you for bringing all of those to life. And we really enjoyed your threading everything together, so thank you.
Dr. Lee, when this whole pandemic clears up, I think I smell a road trip. Best road trip.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Well, thank you again, Dr. Herrera. It was a great presentation, and I appreciate your work and the fellowship that you had with CRS. And I just want to thank everyone for attending. Appreciate it. Thank you, Dr. Herrera, Alicia. I see Dr. Melendez on. I thank you as well for your past work and moving CRS forward. So keep abreast of the Center for Regional Studies. We'll be having more activities coming up. And so everyone be safe and be well, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.